gay pride flag with "Don't Tread on Me" on it in the American Legion. That's the kind of mind I have.
Some things change.
I am a jerk. Just look at my Facebook page if you disagree with me on that. I've lived a life of dissolution, dissipation, and irresponsibility. And it comes, well, anybody who knows me long knows that. I'm going to talk about some of that. Much of what I've done I'm not particularly proud of, but my devotion to liberty and justice is at the basis of everything I've done. I am for liberty, I am for justice, and I am for what works. I didn't place those issues in any particular order. Let's just say that I think that what works generally incorporates liberty and justice. I'm here speaking to you, I guess, because I'm 71 and I may be approaching being the oldest living libertarian in South Dakota. I've been a libertarian in government registration as well as in spirit since 1991. I've run for office in South Dakota as a libertarian several times, and for office a time or two as a Republican and as an independent. I didn't expect to be elected, and I wasn't. I have managed, to the extent someone with almost money can manage, several pro-cannabis ballot issue campaigns. I grew up in a Democratic household, although I think my mom may have voted for Nixon in 1960. Around that time, she was bringing in speakers for the local John Birch Society meetings. My dad thought Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a first cousin to Jesus, inasmuch as Jesus had any influence on my dad's life. I became an independent when I first registered in 1969. I guess maybe I registered when I was 18, which would have been 66. Largely because of the Democrats' brutal repression of Vietnam War protesters in Chicago in 1968. Not to mention the Democrats' pathetic endorsement and pursuit of a war that somehow involved dominoes. I joined the Libertarian Party in 1992. I was friends with the announced senatorial candidate, Gus Hercules, whose political message was gentlemanly and considerate as any political message could be. My political message was and is, why are we arresting people and putting them in prison for trying to feel better or for attempting to help other people feel better? I was the SDLP nominee for U.S. House in '92. I managed to get a DWI a few days after the announcement. I'm not saying that's why I didn't get elected, but it didn't help matters. In 1998, I was a South Dakota LP nominee for governor. I got popped for DUI and possession of paraphernalia, a pipe. Once again, I'm not saying that's why I didn't get elected, but it didn't help matters. When 2002 rolled around, we had placed a constitutional amendment on the South Dakota ballot. In conjunction with the Fully Informed Jury Association, South Dakota LP sponsored a 14-word addition to Section 7 of South Dakota's Constitution, which already guarantees within the movable yard markers of the court system, a defendant's right to a defense, to know the accusation against him, to meet the witnesses against him face to face, to subpoena witnesses to a speedy public trial by jury. We proposed adding to those rights the right to argue the merit, validity, and applicability of the law, including the sentencing laws. Every element of the justice system acted as if we had poured acid on their children. The Southern Poverty Law Center said we were a hate group. The Wall Street Journal sent a reporter to South Dakota and published a pretty even-handed feature story after interviewing a few mostly public defense lawyers. After interviewing me and some other folks at the South Dakota State Fair, he called me and said, "I did find significant support for your ballot issue among the work crew at the fair. You know, the ones in orange jumpsuits." Mike Day, the president of the South Dakota Bar, wrote an editorial in the Bar Association newsletter in which he said that there were many instances of lawyers arguing in favor of jury nullification, such as when John Peter Zenger in 1735 wrote in his paper that the British puppet governor of New York had bad breath. He was charged with seditious libel. The court essentially ordered Zenger's jury to find him guilty. It refused, despite being imprisoned on bread and water for several days itself. Day also mentioned in his editorial that there were no convictions in any trial of any Northerner being charged for harboring a runaway slave in contravention of law upheld in the infamous Dred Scott decision by the Supreme Court. Day then went on to suggest that all such unjust laws had been eradicated and that South Dakotans should reject our dangerous proposition that would open the justness of current laws to argument in the courts. We got beat 82% to 18%, which was a large enough margin to surprise even a cynic like me. I would not have the depths of my cynicism tested like that again for 14 years, when a serial adulterer, notorious scammer, cover-up paying, blatant liar about everything was elected President of the United States by people who say they believe he was sent to save us by God. Since then, my cynicism can barely gain traction against the actuality of what is actually happening. Incidentally, in 2002, I was nominated by the LP for Attorney General. My campaign slogan was, "At least I'm not a lawyer." I managed to make it through that campaign without getting arrested and got 5% of the vote in the race. That means a couple of dozen people I've never met actually voted for me. I mentioned that I was attracted to the LP because in 1992 it was the only political organization of significant proportion with nationwide chapters that proposed that the laws prohibiting sale or ingestion of non-governmental approved psychotropic substances were stupid and counterproductive. Since my first run for office in '92, the depth and breadth of the social tragedy caused by imprisoning people for trying to feel better has steadily become more apparent. U.S. drug policy is easily the most destructive public policy since the end of slavery. It's not worse than Jim Crow laws. It is Jim Crow laws by other means. When there's a drug war tribunal to apply justice to the real criminals who administered the so-called war on drugs, I want to be on it. It may feel like the drug war is winding down, but South Dakota still applies its barbaric, sick, twisted laws that punish sick, disabled, and dying people for trying to feel better, as well as able-bodied, healthy people of all stripes. It still arrests a person for possession of sale of cannabis every hour and 51 minutes, 24/7. It still convicts a person for possession or sale of cannabis every 4 hours and 48 minutes, 24/7. It still has not prevented one solitary person who wants to obtain and smoke weed from doing so. This punishes all of us, even those who believe in those laws. Libertarianism in South Dakota has been an exercise in, well, something other than successful politics, if you gauge success by getting elected. The Socialist Party didn't elect many people either, but the Democrats and Republicans adopted the planks of the socialist platform until the socialists no longer had anything to stand on. What are your options if you're trying to choose a political party to join in South Dakota? Republican? Sure, if you want to violate much of the Republican Party platform in order to please the party chiefs or to enact acts of humanity. The Republican Party contradicts itself so consistently and strenuously that it resembles a hydra with its head full of snakes braided into dreadlocks. Democrats? Well, all 107 South Dakota Democrats are pretty well united against Trump. I predict it will be at least 8 legislative election cycles before Democrats begin threatening to hold the governor's seat or a majority in either house of the legislature. Democrats might be a little more inclined today to endorse liberty and justice in a sense that you and I would understand than Republicans, but they've shown just as much inclination to violate their own principles when principle comes up against political pragmatism. Libertarian? Even if our numbers are beginning to rival those of the Democrats in South Dakota, we're still weak, spread out, and broke. Even so, we've influenced some legislation somewhat positively. I mean, the South Dakota legislature a few months ago overwhelmingly voted for a law that would restore farmers' rights to grow hemp. It wasn't our presentation of fact and reason to them that did it. It was their observation that some semblance of the free market in some states was attracting huge amounts of money. It was the fact that politicians in some states adopted at least one plank of the Libertarian platform. Libertarian, Republican, Democrat, really, for anyone with both principles and a desire to hold political office, those are dismal choices. You'll each proceed to better your lives and the lives of people with whom you interact, even peripherally, in your way of walking your own path. I no longer desire to hold political office, but until I find a political party that aligns with my worldview better, I will vote for libertarians and support them financially to some extent, unless they're clearly nuts. We have seen a few of those in South Dakota Libertarian races. Some would claim I'm one of them. Can we achieve the abolition of taxes? Seems unlikely, but perhaps we can slow down the rate of increase in rates and variety of taxes. I'm not even opposed to all taxes. I am, though, apprehensive over the looming problem of infrastructure disintegration. Roads and bridges are failing and becoming more and more expensive to maintain. Nationwide, as well as in South Dakota, the enormity of the pile of cash needed to restore them to good condition and keep them there is daunting. What's the libertarian solution? I don't know. And need I suggest that it would probably be better for all of us if we kept the number of wars we fight at any one time down to 10 or 12 or so? We, SODAC libertarians, won't have much voice in how we finance road and bridge repair or how many wars we fight. We can, though, have a significant influence over the most insidious threat to citizen government in South Dakota that I have seen in my life. After the legislature was threatened with an initiative to impose some level of ethics on its members in 2016, it simply refused to comply by repealing the new law in its 2017 session. Mark Mickelson, the Speaker of the House, son of a former governor, called the people who proposed and voted for an ethics program for the legislature, not heads. Since there were only a couple hundred Democrats in the state, that meant he was insulting some of the people who voted for him. Not that they didn't deserve the epithet for voting for him. Since then, the squinchy-eyed evangelicals who make up the majority of the legislature have enacted their version of God's will by passing a series of laws that will effectively end the initiative process in South Dakota, the first state to allow citizens to enact laws that the legislature won't. I think just about every person in this room would like to reverse several provisions of these horrible restrictions on our ability to voice our dissatisfaction with their authoritarianism. Corey Heidelberger, the eloquent and hard-charging moderator of Dakota Free Press blog, has already whipped the legislative Pharisees like rented mules in court. He challenged the law they passed in 2019, making it illegal for political action committees in South Dakota to accept out-of-state money. They conveniently exempted themselves from that prohibition. That law was so onerous that even the hapless Marty Jackley joined Heidelberger in that lawsuit. The ACLU, representing the SDLP and the Constitution Party, won a case against the Secretary of State and the legislature last summer, making it possible for us to nominate a candidate for governor in convention and to retain ballot eligible status without expensive petitioning every 4 years. Aaron and I testified in that trial. We knew when we left the courtroom that the judge was going to rule in our favor, although it took him a couple of weeks. The combined legal cost for those two lawsuits was probably in the area of $1.5 million. Of course, the citizens of South Dakota had to pick up that tab and pay the lawyers who won the case. Right now, Heidelberger is heading a PAC called South Dakota Voice, which aims through referendum petition to stop the enactment of a particularly horrible set of restrictions just passed in this last session. Additionally, Corey is sponsoring an initiative that will, if it makes the ballot and passes, reverse several restrictions on petition circulation that are already law. A couple of years ago, ballot issue organizers budgeted a petition drive at about $2 or $2.50 per signature. And that's in the range of what I was paying to manage a campaign. Making most petition drives in South Dakota cost about 50 grand. The new restrictions have upped the projections for the ballot drives in process this year to about $10 per signature. If South Dakota Voice ballot drives are not successful, it's possible there will be no real South Dakota ballot issues proposed in the future. The legislature has made it virtually impossible for anyone to finance a petition drive with South Dakota money. If we don't succeed, only issues financed by out-of-state billions will see the ballot in South Dakota. There's an old cynical quip. If voting changed anything, it would be illegal. In 2016, a ballot issue threatened to change things for the Taliban wing of the South Dakota legislature. Now they have nearly made proposing ballot issues illegal. Several people here, I'm sure, are circulating petitions for these issues. I brought some, they're on the table. Please sign if you haven't already. The referendum needs to be submitted in 10 days, and it is critical. I have a couple of anecdotes to tell before I finish. In 1999, Governor Janklow proposed a law. I've had pain in my knee. Governor Janklow proposed a law that would make any drug conviction punishable by a mandatory minimum 30-day stay in the South Dakota pen. In legislative testimony for the law, he said, "Everybody knows I drive fast. If I get stopped for doing 88 miles per hour, I pay the fine. If I knew I was going to do 30 days in the pen, I wouldn't drive that fast." Then he said, "I don't have many moral principles. I don't. But I do know what drugs do to young girls." The swivel-headed glances among the spectators in the legislative room that day was something to see. What did that guy just say? His proposal was killed, but only after having passed through 2 legislative committees and the Senate floor vote. My final anecdote is about the time in 2009 I got popped with a 1/4 ounce of skunk weed, which I was delivering to an AIDS patient. I got stopped for speeding, and since, like a fool, I had the skunk in the passenger compartment rather than the trunk, put the skunk in the trunk. The patrolman smelled it. I pled to felony possession and was sentenced to a year's probation after 45 days on work release. During the sentencing hearing, Judge Delaney made a little speech about his admiration for my activism and even compared me to Muhammad Ali. I guess because, like Ali, I didn't flee to Canada to avoid prosecution under an unjust law. I never did figure out what he was talking about. He then added the apparently contradictory condition that, until I was off probation, I could not engage in any public advocacy for the reform of cannabis laws. It would have been worse if he had sentenced me not to be able to go to Walmart. On that note of weirdness, I'll close. I'm happy to see that there's a whole new group of South Dakotans, a new generation being active in libertarian issues. Thanks for being my friends, for devoting time and money to fight the South Dakota Taliban, and for the honor you've bestowed on me today. And happy Father's Day to those for whom it's appropriate.